Hi, it's me again. I hope you didn't miss me too much. Welcome to the RollerCoaster Tycoon Iceberg. I've been a huge fan of Iceberg videos for years and I've always wanted to make one, so why not make one on something that I've been playing for over a decade. I tried to find an RCT Iceberg on YouTube but came out empty-handed, which surprised me a lot, so I'm here today to make that a reality. Just quickly, if you're unaware, an Iceberg video is basically just a specific topic, whether it be TV shows, games, or serial killers, and as the iceberg gets deeper, the facts get more and more obscure. This video was inspired by an incomplete iceberg I found on icebergcharts.com, so I've added in my own facts as well as some facts on that chart to make this video more interesting. By the way, this video will be going over things from RCT 1 and 2 with some stuff from RCT 3 scattered around, as every game after that is just complete garbage. There will be a link to the iceberg chart, all the resources and footage I used, and the music list in the description, so feel free to check those out if you're interested. And with all that out of the way, let's explore the RollerCoaster Tycoon Iceberg. Starting off at tier 1, we have the sky, which is basically just going to be all your typical RCT stuff, where if you've played the game once or even seen gameplay of it, then you've probably heard of these before. So let's start off with the big ones. OpenRCT2. OpenRCT2 is an open source re-implementation of the original RCT2. It fixes bugs, adds new features like cheats and multiplayer, and also has all content from the Wacky Worlds and Time Twister expansion packs. Easily the best place to start if you're interested in playing any RCT game. Mr. Bones Wild Ride. Mr. Bones Wild Ride is one of the most well-known fan creations in RCT2 history. Posted by an anonymous user on 4chan in March 2012, it shows a car ride going through a cemetery with various trees and bone statues throughout. The ride lasts for 4 in-game years, with guests constantly wanting to get off Mr. Bones Wild Ride. The ride got so famous that it's even made it onto t-shirts, one of which I own. Drowning guests. In RCT 1 and 2, you're able to pick up guests and place them wherever you want. This includes the water. So if you feel like doing some trolling, you can pick up an innocent guest, put them in a lake and watch them drown, as for some reason they don't know how to swim in this game, which is quite strange. Ducks can quack. As you're playing, you may encounter some ducks swimming around, and by clicking on them, they quack. This one's pretty simple, but it is a fun and small little detail. Popping balloons. Either during the scenario or at the end, guests will sometimes let go of balloons they have purchased, and you can pop them as they float up to the sky. Just like the ducks, this is another small but fun little detail. I always remember when I was younger trying to pop all of the floating balloons after beating a scenario. Good times. Puke. Like in real life, after a guest gets off an intense ride, they will proceed to puke all over the ground. Just make sure you have a handyman nearby to help clean up, as this can make your park rating plummet. Charging for restrooms. This one speaks for itself. If you feel like it, you can actually make your guests pay to use the bathroom. A clever but scummy trick that may leave your guests wanting to go home, and I don't blame them. I wanted to test to see how much money guests were willing to pay, so I set up 2 toilets side by side, one free and one paid, and after some testing I was able to get the guests to spend £2 to use the toilet, but nothing after that, as no one wanted to fork up the £3. Both toilets were also used a similar amount of times, which is quite interesting. Reading guests' thoughts. If you click on a guest, a menu will come up showing the rides they've been on, how they're feeling, and what they're carrying, but you can also see what they're thinking about. Some of these include, "This park is really clean and tidy," or "I haven't finished my fried chicken yet," or even, "I want to go on something more thrilling than Twister Zone." Rides explode upon crashing. If a ride ends up derailing, instead of it falling to the ground and rolling along the terrain, it'll just explode. Sometimes it will do this before even leaving the track, and will also explode upon making contact with another car. A very interesting inclusion, to say the least. RCT2 discs in cereal boxes. Back in the day, you were able to get an RCT2 disc for free in cereal boxes. Imagine waking up in the morning, pouring a bowl of Cheerios and seeing an RCT2 disc fall out. Basically the equivalent of winning the lottery for like a 6-year-old. The fact you were able to get a game like this for free back in the day is insane. Six Flags parks. Included in the Real Park section of RCT2, you can find 5 scenarios based on real life Six Flags parks. These include Six Flags Belgium, Great Adventure, Holland, Magic Mountain, and Over Texas. It also includes a build your own Six Flags park, which is basically just a big empty plane that is very fun to mess around in, and I have a lot of fond childhood memories in. Rides based on real life coasters. In RCT, there are many rides based on actual real life roller coasters. One of the more well known ones is Goliath from Six Flags Magic Mountain, an enormous ride reaching a height of 72 metres and a top speed of 137 km an hour. There's also RCT2's Mine Train, which could be inspired by the runaway mine train at Alton Towers, and if this is true, that's pretty cool. a tribute to RollerCoaster Tycoon, a retrospective by popular creator JSchlatt with over 1 million views where he reminisces about RCT2 and how it continues to thrive 20 years later. With some jokes thrown in there, it makes for a great video, and it's also how I found his channel, so I highly encourage you to check it out if you're in the mood for a laugh. RollerCoaster Tycoon in real life. A video uploaded by Nukazuka in 2012, it shows him building his own park in real life. A very impressive video for its time, and over 11 years later, it sits at over 52 million views, with it being by far the most viewed RCT video on YouTube. Vinesauce Joel. Back in 2015 and 16, funny Swedish man Joel from Vinesauce uploaded 2 stream highlights of him messing around in OpenRCT2, which combined got over 9 million views. The first video includes one of his famous jokes that you may know, the Asian driver experience, which refers to the fact that he made the dodgems play Oriental music. And the second video is just him messing around on some multiplayer. 2 great videos that are always enjoyable to go back and rewatch. Next up at tier 2 we have The Surface. Still pretty well known stuff, but not quite getting into the obscure things just yet. If you're a fan of the series, then chances are that you know many of these, so let's get into tier 2. More games after RCT 1 and 2. While the first 2 games are the most popular in the series, the next entries, however, not so much. RCT3 was received well, but anything after that has just been swept aside and forgotten about, which makes sense as most of them are pretty terrible games. Like, look at this. What part of this is appealing? Chris Sawyer had a great formula going, but after Atari took over, it was just all downhill from there. Other Chris Sawyer games. Obviously Chris Sawyer is mainly known for RCT 1 and 2, but he also developed 2 other games. His first game, Transport Tycoon, was released in 1994, a whole 5 years before RCT 1, and then in 2004 he released Chris Sawyer's Locomotion, which came out just 2 years after RCT 2. These games were enjoyed by many, but just weren't as popular as their roller coaster counterparts. Transport Tycoon also has an open source version of it, OpenTTD, another great thing by the community keeping the games alive after 3 decades. Chris Sawyer is Scottish. This one kind of explains itself, but I've decided to include it for 2 reasons. One being that I'm Scottish, and the other being that my dad works with someone who knows Chris, which is really cool. It's kind of crazy to think about the man who made one of my favourite childhood games just lives a couple hours drive away from me. Marcel Vos. Marcel Vos is an RCT2 content creator from the Netherlands with over 130,000 subscribers. He makes weekly videos on the game, with many videos like ride overviews, overpowered coasters, challenges and more. Definitely worth a watch if you're interested in that sort of stuff. Megaparks. Popularised by YouTuber Fluxtrans back in late 2012, megaparks are what they sound like. You load into a scenario and have unlimited money and a huge plot to work with. A really interesting concept that can lead to some impressive looking parks. His series features 46 videos spanning across 93 in-game years, which is about 93 hours of playtime. Guests have immense G-force resistance. You'll notice that when guests get off a really intense ride, all they'll do is just puke on the ground. This feature is pretty funny as you can literally just build some inhumane contraption and subject your guests to as much torture as you like, but it's alright, because they'll all come off unscathed and say the ride was great. First aid rooms. Apparently first aid rooms aren't that well known, but they actually serve a pretty useful purpose. They're used to help guests overcome nausea, so the next time you think of putting a restroom outside an intense ride, place a first room instead. Benches also help with nausea, as when guests sit down, the nausea meter will go down over time. No legal repercussions after death of guests. So you're just minding your own business, building a new ride, placing some food stalls, when out of nowhere, one of your rides crashes and 8 people die. What happens next? Absolutely nothing. That's right, you could hypothetically load all of your guests onto a single ride, send them into space, and suffer no legal repercussions whatsoever. I guess the only downside to this is your park rate will be lowered significantly, but I'm sure we can all agree that this is a pretty fun thing to do. Handymen sweep puke. By looking closely at what's going on in your park, you'll be able to see that your handymen actually sweep up guests' puke. This can be quite easy to miss, especially if you have thousands of guests walking around, but you're also able to see that in the handyman menu, it will say sweeping puke. Just another small detail that gives the game a little bit more charm. Scenarios based on real life places. In the Wacky World expansion packs for RCT2, there are many scenarios based on real life places. Some of these include the Great Wall of China, the Grand Canyon, and even Antarctica. In total, there are 17 parks spanning across all 7 continents. Raising the price of umbrellas when it rains. Here's a great tip for you to keep the money rolling in if you're struggling or just simply want to get more money. No matter what price you set your umbrellas to, guests will always buy them no matter what when it's raining. This is a pretty well known money trick, so be sure to use it every time it rains. Vandals. When a guest becomes unhappy, largely due to the state of the park, they will start destroying benches, bins and even lampposts. Like, these guests must have some strength if they're able to bend lampposts. An easy way to deal with them is by hiring a security guard or just moving them away from other guests as they'll eventually calm down. I always thought security guards had no real purpose, but they can actually be quite useful. The impossible maze. By building a maze in a certain way, it makes it almost impossible for guests to find their way out. Even though it's just a straight line with dead ends to your left, the guest's AI will just break and cause them to walk back and forth trying to figure out what to do despite the maze being incredibly easy to get through. Marcel Vos has a great video on it which goes over it in a lot more detail. Rides are insanely cheap. As we all know, roller coasters in real life cost a lot to build. They range from a few $100,000 to even over $1 million. How much do rides cost in RCT to build? How about a few $10,000s? The same can even be said for concession stands, which only cost a few hundred of your currency. Imagine that, building an entire food court for just a few £1,000s. Ride seats are filled with gunpowder. A silly theory is that the ride seats in RCT are filled with gunpowder, as upon making contact with the ground they explode, which obviously they don't do in real life. Sometimes rides may explode immediately after derailing, which is interesting. Maybe they have someone controlling when the seats blow up. Who knows? We're now into the water of the iceberg, and the facts here start to get a little bit more obscure. If you know the series well and have a keen eye, then you may know about these. So let's take a dip into shallow waters. Only one person screaming during impending crash. When a ride derails and is about to crash, only one scream sound effect is played.
Oh fuck, what? Bye.
This could mean a couple of things. Either all the guests are screaming in harmony, or, the more chilling thing, that only one of them knows what's about to happen. But surely everyone would know, right? Right? RCT 1 and 2 were developed in assembly. What are some coding languages you've heard of? There's Python, JavaScript and C#, just to name a few. Ever heard of assembly? Yeah, it looks like this. And Chris Sawyer developed 4 games using this language, which just makes him the GOAT of game development. So why did he use assembly and not something easier to use? Well, back in the day, hardware was more limited than it is nowadays, and using assembly was much better when it comes to a game's performance, so he ended up going with that. Carousel breakdown music. The carousel, one of RCT's most iconic attractions. But did you know when it breaks down, it plays the same tune but at a slightly distorted pitch? Here's a quick example. Yeah, it sounds pretty weird. This is a strange little detail that can easily go unnoticed, as there's probably a lot of noise in your park and the chance of you hearing it are little to none. Invisible rides. There's a setting in OpenRCT2 called Allow Arbitrary Ride Type Changes, and if you select this option for a ride it doesn't apply to, then the ride will become invisible. So if you want to set a bobsleigh coaster to a cash machine, then you can, and it'll look like this. And you can also set it to a hybrid coaster and it'll look like this. The ride still operates as normal and it looks pretty cool. Speedrunning. When you think of speedrunning, what are some games that come to mind? Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Wii Sports Resort are some of the most well-known speed games out there. RCT has an extremely small speedrunning community with very few active players. The runs basically consist of you doing your typical RCT stuff until you reach the park objective, but just a bit faster than you normally do casually. A very interesting and underrated speed game. Name cheats. By giving guests certain names, it will make them do unique things. By naming your guests either Chris Sawyer, Jacques Villeneuve, Michael Schumacher or Damon Hill, they will all drive their go-karts faster than a regular guest, and naming a guest Mr. Bean will make them drive significantly slower. Simon Foster, the guy behind all the graphics for RCT 1 and 2, will stop frequently to draw on a canvas, and by naming a guest Katie Roger will make them want to leave the park immediately. There are many more of these name cheats, but I'd be here all day telling you about them, so here's a few quick ones that I'll show on screen. Land Wall Void Exit. If the exit of a ride is placed facing towards a wall, the guest will just walk into it and fall to their doom. This is an effective way to kill your guests and also doesn't affect your park rating. So the next time you feel like killing some guests but don't want to lose rating, just place a big wall in front of the exit and you'll be set. All guests look the same. One thing you'll notice that may not be too obvious at first is that every single guest in your park looks the exact same. Without counting clothing, as that's random, every guest has the same skin, shoe, hair and eye colour, which I guess makes sense as it would seem kinda pointless to have guests have a different eye colour for example, as you can barely see them. 135 year long coaster. Dubbed the Century Coaster, this ride goes on for 135 years of in-game time. Basically how it works is that there is a Wild Mouse coaster and a Junior coaster with stations that are synchronised, so the Wild Mouse coaster can only depart when there is a train ready to depart in the station of the Junior coaster. It'll slow down to 1 km as it makes its way around the track, and eventually it'll hit a hill and roll all the way back around to the start. And by the way, the backward speed is about 8 times slower than the forward speed. There's way more to this ride, but I don't want to ramble on for ages, so please feel free to check out Marcel Vos' video if you would like to learn more. Guests come to your park alone. You may have noticed that in RCT3 guests can come to your park in groups, but they don't do this in RCT1 and 2. At times it may look like guests can be walking together, but they'll always part ways at some point. Maybe it was too hard to code this sort of thing, maybe it was intentional, who knows. Security guards and entertainers are actually useful. We all know of the two main types of staff we all hire in RCT. There's the handymen who can sweep puke, mow grass, empty bins and water flowers. Then there's the mechanics who fix a ride whenever it breaks down, but what you may not know is that the two other types of staff, security guards and entertainers, are actually quite useful. Security guards are there to help prevent vandalism, and entertainers can help guests make happier and boost park rating, but they can also make guests wait in line forever even if the ride is broken, which is pretty funny. I briefly mentioned security guards on the last tier, so this is sort of an extension to that. With tier 4 we have now reached to the deep waters, with facts even fans of the series may not even know of, so let's see what we have in store. White Knuckle. RCT1 was originally supposed to be called White Knuckle, and even throughout development the name still stood, but after Hasbro purchased Microprose, the Tycoon connection was too good to pass up, so in the end it became RollerCoaster Tycoon. White Knuckle is a cool name for a game, but just the sheer simplicity of RollerCoaster Tycoon just makes more sense, and in my opinion was the right choice to make. I have the strangest feeling that someone is watching me. Like I mentioned earlier, you're able to read your guests' thoughts, but if you leave the window open for long enough, they'll eventually think, I have the strangest feeling that someone is watching me. An eerie but very cool fourth wall break that I'm a huge fan of. Clock decoration tells the time. In the garden section of the scenery tab, you'll see many different types of flowers and a clock, but not just any clock. A clock that reads the same time as your PC. If you look at it for long enough, you'll be able to see the minute hand move. It can be a bit hard to see as the zoom feature in RCT2 isn't the best, so here's a screenshot of the clock at different times. First guest in Forest Frontiers is guest 3 instead of guest 1. In Forest Frontiers, the first park in RCT1, the first guest to walk in is guest 3. Why is that? Well, according to Chris Sawyer, during development of the park, guests 1 and 2 walked in, didn't really think much of the park and walked straight back home. I mean, you can't really blame them, there probably wasn't really much there. 0 out of 10 park, Chris, do better. Chris Sawyer on the box art. On the back of the US box art for RCT1, Chris Sawyer is pictured riding a roller coaster. The ride he's on is Megaphobia, which opened in 1996 and is located at Oakwood Theme Park in Wales. Many pictures were taken that day, some of which even being used to help promote the game, but the final one used was a picture of Chris about halfway down the first drop. Apparently it was so cold that day that they had to wait for the ice to melt off the ride before they could start taking pictures. Invincible RCT3 guests. As mentioned before, it is really easy to kill your guests in RCT1 and 2. Just build some death machine and watch the cart explode into millions of pieces. You can try to kill your guests in RCT3, but it doesn't really work. The easiest way to test this is to line up a bunch of guests and make a cart go flying off the track. The cart will hit them and they'll get knocked over, but they won't die. Tickling guests. In RCT3, by clicking on a guest multiple times, one of their thoughts will be, that tickles. There's not really else much to say here, except that this is a nice touch that gives an overshadowed game a little bit more charm. The rival park myth. There's a myth that's gone around over the years that you're competing with a rival park to see who can achieve the higher park rating. Obviously this isn't real, but it's pretty interesting to think about. People have even gone as far as to launch coasters out of their map and into their rivals, in order to lower their park rating, and I mean I can't blame them. It's a clever strategy, and surely if a ride crashes in your park it's your fault, right? RollerCoaster Tycoon board game. Released in 2002 by Hasbro and the Parker Brothers, the RCT board game takes on a similar approach to Monopoly, but instead of travelling around London or Leeds, buying out train stations and towns, you compete with up to 3 other people, purchasing rides and attractions while trying to get guests to go on your rides as you collect guest points in the process, and the person with the most points wins. I've been looking at buying this for my collection for a while, but every single listing comes from the US and has stupidly expensive postage. Now we're in the dark waters of the Iceberg with a lot of stuff I wasn't even aware of until doing research for this video. You have to be a true RCT enthusiast to know about some of these facts that are coming up. Ghost train crashes on turns. There are many rides in RCT2, but did you know that there's only one ride that will crash if going too fast and encounters a corner? Well, now you know, and that ride is the Ghost Train. The Ghost Train is a pretty slow ride, so it makes sense that it crashes upon reaching a corner too fast. There's many other slow rides in RCT2, but this seems to be the only one that does this. Guests won't buy ice cream when it's raining. The next fact is a really interesting one, and you could probably beat every single scenario in the game without even noticing this. But yes, guests won't buy ice cream when it's raining, and if there are other stalls next to it, they'll just buy something from there instead. I don't blame them though. Who would want to eat ice cream in the pouring rain? Not me, that's for sure. Haunted House in Berserk mode. You can set many different rides to many different modes, most of which do literally nothing and won't even allow you to open the ride, but if you set the Haunted House to Berserk mode, this happens. The glowing figure still pops out the top window like normal, but the top of the Haunted House just starts to glitch out. I tried this with some other attractions, but nothing ended up happening. Player is God / greatest theme park manager in the world. This comes from a comment on the channel All Rights Rejected. I couldn't find the channel or even the comment, but we know what it says and it goes like this. You see, everyone being the same is actually one of the more deeper themes of RCT. This is to represent your view as a cold, detached, omnipotent park owner. In this point of view, guests are simply a means to an end of stroking your ego, having a high enough park rating. Finally, proving to not just yourself but the world that you are the greatest park owner to ever exist and others are simply a tool to reach this goal. In this world there are no men and women, no families, no friends, no differences of any kind, not even people. In this world there is only guest. Yeah, pretty deep stuff for a fun little rollercoaster game. There's some interesting points in there though, really makes you think. RCT3 ride glitch. In the time it took me to get from my notes to writing this part of the script, I completely forgot where I found out about this. But apparently in RCT3, if you set any part of the multi-dimensional roller coaster to above 180 degrees, then the train will just spin out of control for that section of the ride. Despite being such a much less memorable game than RCT1 or 2, RCT3 has some cool stuff to it that many of the fans of the original games will just have no idea about. Images and text. This is something that was on the unfinished Iceberg chart and I wasn't sure if I wanted to include it or not, but I decided to anyway. Apparently you're able to place sprites using this format, but it only seems to work in OpenRCT2. Not gonna lie, I'm not really sure what this one means, but if you're smart enough, give it a go and let me know how it works. Chain lift and intro comes from a real ride. I'm sure we all have memories of putting in our RCT2 disc, loading up the game and hearing the iconic chain lift. But did you know that it comes from an actual ride? It was uploaded by David Ellis and shows him going up the chain lift of Raging Bull at Six Flags Great America. Chris also used some of David's other clips to match some of the coasters in the game. The attention to detail of RCT2 is amazing and just shows you how much Chris cared about the game. The oldest RCT videos on YouTube. Since the first 3 RCT games came out before YouTube even existed, there was no good way of documenting them. But as 2005 came around, now there was. If we go back in time to May 2006, we can find the oldest RCT1 video on YouTube fittingly titled RollerCoaster Tycoon at Death Trap, where guests get launched off a ramp and fall to their death. But wait, we can go back even further to November 2005 with the oldest RCT3 video on YouTube titled RCT3 Fantasy Islands, where we get an overview tour of the person's new park. I'll be leaving these linked down in the description, so feel free to check them out if you're interested in a bit of RCT history. As we reach the second last tier of the iceberg, we are truly in deep waters now, where the light won't reach us from down here. This is your completely unknown stuff you'd have to go out of your way to find out about. With some fun and silly facts, it makes for a great tier. Snow weather. In the files for RCT2, there exists an unused sprite for snow weather, and it looks like this. I'm not gonna lie, it doesn't really look like snow, but it kinda makes sense as, you know, you can't see white snow on a white background, but even light grey would have worked. Unfortunately, this didn't make it into the final version of the game, which is really sad, because it being able to snow in RCT seems so cool. I wonder why it was scrapped in the end. But it doesn't end badly as you're able to make it snow using OpenRCT2 with options for snow, heavy snow, and blizzard. Mini golf explosion. Want your guests to explode after completing a round of mini golf? Well, now you can. After you've built a mini golf course, by going into the cheats menu and selecting the tile inspector, you're able to mess around with certain tiles. You can then select any tile a guest can walk on, and for the best effect it would be good to choose the last tile, and by turning it 180 degrees to make it look normal, as soon as the guest reaches it, boom, they explode and die. Pretty silly way to kill your guests and a fun trick to show your friends and family. You can even add a loop into your mini golf course and it still acts the same as normal. Once again, Marcel Vos has a great video on the subject and I highly encourage you to give it a watch. Factory Capers Pond. Ah yes, the good old Factory Capers Pond. We all know Factory Capers, one of the first maps you have access to in RCT2 and an iconic one at that, but it has a hidden secret, the pond. Load into Factory Capers for me real quick, turn the screen 90 degrees clockwise and remove all scenery and pathway blocking your view of it. Looks kinda strange, doesn't it? For those unaware, the pond I've been going on and on about looks like this. Care to explain this one, Chris? In a kid's game? Some people. Rock Style 1 and Modern Style aren't exclusive to RCT2. There actually happens to be 2 songs in RCT2 that aren't exclusive to the game. You've got Rock Style 1, which appears in the Driver OST under Driver Soundtrack 8, and Modern Style can be found in the OST of Chris Sawyer's Locomotion under the name Techno Torture. Here's parts of both songs played in their respective games. Impossible asset compression. In the original 2 RCT games, there are hundreds of thousands, even millions of sprites and images, so how are they able to fit in just a few hundred megabytes? Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that the game was made in assembly, or Chris Sawyer's just a wizard and smarter than everyone else on planet Earth. This was something else that I wasn't sure if I wanted to add or not, but I thought I'd throw it in just for fun. RCT music at Alton Towers. Alton Towers is a theme park located in Staffordshire, England, with many notable rides such as the Smiler, Nemesis and Oblivion. It also has 2 hotels near the park, one of which has a water park in it. But did you know that they planned to use RCT music for the park? Yeah, Alton Towers had originally planned to use some of the music pieces from RCT for their Swan Boat rides, but unfortunately the plans for it were dropped. I've been going to Alton Towers since I was little and we used to stay for a few nights every October, so hearing RCT music there would have been crazy to me. Really is a shame that the plans were dropped in the end. Chris Sawyer's initials in Haunted Harbour. In the very back corner of RCT1's Haunted Harbour, you're able to buy land in the shape of the initials CS, which obviously stand for Chris Sawyer. While you can't really do much with the land as it's just a small area, it's a very cool Easter egg that will go unnoticed by many. We've now reached the final tier of the Iceberg, and I've reserved tier 7 for one thing in particular, that being the Evolution of RollerCoaster Tycoon website. The Evolution of RollerCoaster Tycoon. The only place I was able to find access to this website was from a reply to a Reddit post from 7 years ago with 59 upvotes, and by clicking on it, we're met with this. Thankfully we have the Wayback Machine and can see what it looked like back then. From September 1996 to August 1998, the website was regularly updated with early development screenshots, UI changes, concepts, and many things that were planned to be in the final game but just didn't quite make it in. Some of my favourites include this screenshot of a roller coaster overview, a concept for a bus ride to bring people to and from the park, as well as a track piece to be damaged upon rides exploding, and many unused house sprites that could have been used as decoration. Overall, this website was a really cool way to show off Chris's early ideas for what was soon to be RollerCoaster Tycoon, and is a great piece of history for RCT. I'll leave a link to the website and the Wayback Machine in the description, and I highly encourage that you go and check it out for yourself. And just like that, we are done. Thanks for watching, I really hope you enjoyed the video. The script and voice lines for this video were done back in February and March of this year, and I've been on and off editing for the last few months, and we're now in October, so my motivation for making this video has definitely been up and down throughout the year, but I'm very glad to finally be releasing this video. This was my first time making an Iceberg video, so let me know what you thought of it, and if there's anything I could do better, please also let me know down in the comments. RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 is one of my favourite childhood games, so making a video like this about it was a lot of fun. Like I said at the start, all my resources will be linked in the description, so check those out if you feel like it. Alright, I'll let you get back to what you were doing before you clicked on this video, but I can't imagine it was too important. I'll see you in 2 years for my next video. Have a good one.